Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of BNN. So we are with Bhante and this morning we will be studying the Sutta. No,
Abhiṇa-paccavekkhitabba-ṭhāna Sutta.
Oh, I lost the part of it. The computer had cropped it. All right. Well, welcome, Jens. Welcome, Geeta, Ella, Rich. Hello, and Ron.
Okay.
And welcome, Bhante Sudhaso. All right. So
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good morning, friends. So this morning we're going to go through the words of the Buddha. So you should get this delicious opportunity to learn and contemplate and internalize the teachings of the Buddha. So in the Mahayana traditions, they often begin any sutta study session or any lecture with a short chant, which says, loosely, I'm paraphrasing here, it says, the Dhamma is rarely met with, even at 100,000 million eons. Now that I have the precious opportunity to learn it, to study it, to master it, I vow to grasp the meaning of the Buddha's words. That's a really beautiful little reflection. It's quite short, but it's that reminder that encountering the Dharma is rare, extremely rare, extremely precious. And so knowing that, then we make the vow to try to understand it and to practice in line with it. Okay? So today we'll be looking at the Abhiṇa-paccavekkhitabba-ṭhāna Sutta, which is Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 5, Sutta number 57, which is translated here as things to frequently contemplate. And of course, this being Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Fives, you can reasonably expect there to be a list of 5 in here somewhere. So the sutta begins, monks, there are 5 things that should be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a lay person or a monastic. What 5? So it's important here, by the way, that the Buddha is starting off by emphasizing that these contemplations are for everyone. One of the things that people often say in Buddhist practice is they'll encounter some teaching or some practice or some precept, and they'll be like, oh, well, I'm just a lay person. I don't need to follow that. I'm just a lay person. I don't need to think about that. I'm just a lay person. That's only for the monks. That's not for me. And of course, that's utter BS. And here the Buddha double underlines that it's utter BS by saying that these contemplations are for everyone, whether you're female or male or other, whether you're layperson or monastic, it's for everyone. So no excuses. Then I guess someone seems to find this amusing. Then the Buddha continues. Well, actually, first, I just want to say a little bit about the word that's translated here as contemplated. So the Pali word is paccavekkhitabba, which comes from the prefix patti, which means back or against or returning, and ava, which means down or around, and ikka, which means to look. So paccavekkhitabba means like to look down, around, all around, and continually returning to something. So it's this idea of carefully looking at something from all angles, from all sides, really carefully considering all of its consideration, really carefully considering all of its aspects and characteristics from every perspective, from every angle, from every viewpoint. So the first one, the Buddha says, I am subject to decay. I am not exempt from decay. This should be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic. So Buddhism is sometimes accused of being a pessimistic religion, and it's probably because of things like this. But realistically, a great deal of our suffering comes from the fact that we think that we're going to be healthy and bright and vigorous and youthful forever and ever, despite the fact that reality keeps demonstrating otherwise every single day. So some wording things here. So the word translated as decay is jara. So the Pali word jara, it means decay, decrepitude, weakening, the gradual failing over time. And this word is often translated simply as old age or as aging, but that really misses the flavor of the word jara. The word jara doesn't mean aging, it means decaying. It doesn't just mean old age, it means decrepitude. So some people, when they hear the word old age, they think of these like cute old grandparents who are so sweet and so wise and so loving. And no, that's not what he's talking about. No, he's talking about your teeth cracking and falling out. He's talking about your bones becoming so brittle they break when you fall. He's talking about it being a struggle just to get up out of your bed in the morning. He's talking about your skin falling off. He's talking about all the unpleasant aspects of a decaying body. And we all live inside decaying bodies, so this is something we need to reflect on. The other word I want to speak about a bit more is the word exempt. So the Pali word is anattita. So anattita has three parts. So the prefix an means not or non. Ati means over or beyond. And itta is gone, so moved. So anattita means not gone beyond, not transcended. So it's translated here as not exempt, which is admittedly a slightly loose translation. So not transcended or not gone beyond might be a bit closer to the literal meaning of the Pali word here. Because there's also the implication that we have the capacity to transcend these things. So a fully enlightened being has transcended these five things. And I'll talk a bit more about that after I've gone through more of the sutta. But for the rest of us, we're not exempt from these things. We're still caught by them. So I'm subject to decay. I'm not exempt from decay. This should be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic. Second one, I am subject to sickness. I am not exempt from sickness. This should be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic. So this should be particularly evident these days when a lot of people are getting sick with a quite dangerous illness. It's especially personal living right next to New York City, as we do here at Empty Cloud Monastery. We're right next to New York City. And in fact, we're in New Jersey, which in the US is the state with, last I checked, the second highest infection rates. So it's quite a big deal. It's something which is quite visible. But it's always been this way. We've always been subject to sickness. As you reflect over your life, you can probably think of at least one time when you were sick. Possibly even at least one time when you were severely ill. I remember one time I was staying at a monastery and I got really sick for relatively a short period of time. It was just 2 or 3 days that I was really sick. But for that period of time, I couldn't even get out of bed. Like the other monks would bring me food and water and check on me. But during that time, I really couldn't do anything. And also my mind was very hazy and blurry, very confused. And my body was extremely uncomfortable. And this is when I was in my 20s. I was still quite young and healthy, comparatively speaking. But even so, it doesn't take much to get sick. You just pick up some unpleasant microbes at a time when your immune system is not doing so great, and next thing you know, you're laid out for a few days. So it's something which we should really reflect on. That sickness is not something that we can avoid. It's something which is, we can do our best to minimize it, but it's just the fact of having a human body. Third, the Buddha says, I am subject to dying. I am not exempt from dying. This should be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic. So the Pali word here is marana, translated literally as dying. Sometimes you'll see this line translated as, I am subject to death. But the word marana literally means dying. So the root mar means die, and the suffix ana is exactly like the English suffix ing, so ing. So marana is literally dying. So I find that an important distinction, because death we think of as being a single moment, the moment of death. Whereas dying is a process which can take quite some time. It can take days, weeks, months, years even. And the dying process can be exceptionally uncomfortable, unpleasant, and distressing. So I find it interesting here to emphasize that aspect, that when the Buddha talks about this contemplation, I am subject to dying, he's not just talking about that instant of death, but also including the whole dying process leading up to that moment. And that dying process can be quite drawn out and quite distressing, quite unpleasant. Not always, of course, but it can be. So recollecting that we're subject to dying, it's not something that we can avoid. And this is one of the themes of meditation which the Buddha recommends and goes into a bit more detail elsewhere in the suttas. So the recollection of death, the remembrance that we are going to die, that this is a certainty which cannot be avoided, and that we don't know when or how it's going to happen. We only know for sure that it will happen. So I think Ayasoma will be talking more about the contemplation of death in a few days. Is it you who's talking about that? Yeah, Ayasoma will be talking about it. Then the fourth one, this is one I find particularly poignant. Everything that is beloved and pleasing will change and be separated from me. This should be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic. Everything that is beloved and pleasing. Does that include your cat? It includes your favorite shawl. It includes your house. It includes your bank account. It includes your fame. It includes the respect you get from others or don't get from others, as the case may be. Everything that is beloved and pleasing will change and be separated from. And the Pali here is a little bit interesting, because the word translated here as will change and be separated, so Pali nana bhavo vinabhavo, is technically speaking, it's in the present tense. So it's already changing. It's already becoming separate from us. So it's not something that will happen. It's something that already is happening. It's happening right this very moment. So that's another little detail which I find interesting. So often we think, okay, yeah, of course, eventually I'm going to lose my cat, but probably not for a few years. So in the meantime, I'll just snuggle with the little fuzzy all morning. It's no problem. But actually, he's already lost to us. He's already changing. He's already separated from us. There's no delay. It's right now. And of course, the purpose of this contemplation is to break our attachment to things. Because attachment to things is based on the delusion that there is some ongoing reliability of that thing. We're attached to something because we think we're going to still have it tomorrow. We're attached to something because we think we're going to still have it an hour from now. You think you still have your cat, but go and check in an hour. Do you still have your cat? Did you ever have your cat? Maybe not. Ayasoma doesn't like this one. She's very attached to her cat. Well, it's not her cat. It's a temple cat. But she seems to think it's her cat.
No.
She's a little delusional on this point. She's very obsessed with that temple cat, which is not hers. Then the fifth one. This one is the most cheerful of the five, by the way, even though it doesn't look particularly cheerful necessarily. The fifth one. I am the owner of my karma, the recipient of my karma, born from my karma, bound to my karma, inseparable from my karma. Any action that I do, whether it is good or evil, I will receive its result. This should be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic. So this one, it's emphasizing the role that volition plays in our experience, the role that intention plays in our experience. So karma is intention. The Buddha is very clear on this. Karma is our attitude behind what we do, the intention behind everything that we do. And the intention underlying our mind states and attitudes as well. So I am the owner of my karma. So that means whatever we do, every single choice that we make, that belongs to us. I am the recipient of my karma. So whatever we're experiencing, we're receiving from our past choices. So you think that life is giving you the short end of the stick? Okay, bad news. You are giving yourself the short end of the stick. You're just receiving your own karma. But also when really wonderful, pleasant, joyful things happen to you. Well, once again, you're the recipient of your karma. I'm born from my karma. So our experience, our life, our circumstances are arising directly from our own karma. They're coming directly from the past choices that we've made. I'm inseparable from my karma. So we can't pull ourselves apart from our karma. So we can't separate ourselves from the choices that we've made in the past and the consequences of those choices. And the Pali word here, again, is quite interesting. So the Pali word is patisarana. So patisarana literally means running back to or returning to. So another way of translating this phrase, instead of inseparable from my karma, is you could say, I am continually returning to my karma. So this also is indicating the fact that we can't remove ourselves from the choices that we make or the consequences that they bring. So all we can do is to be extremely careful what choices we make and to only make wholesome choices, to only make good choices. And similarly to recognize. So to recognize that the consequences of our past actions will inevitably come to us. There's no escaping them. There's no avoiding them. Which means that we need to be ready to face our karmic consequences with serenity. To face them with peacefulness, to face them with acceptance. And to develop a genuine equanimity towards those consequences, to endure them with a peaceful mind. So then the Buddha goes into a bit more detail on how some of the ways to apply these 5 contemplations. So the Buddha next, he says, monks, for what benefit should I am subject to decay, I am not exempt from decay, be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic. In other words, why should we contemplate that we're subject to decay? And the Buddha says, monks, there are beings who are intoxicated with youth. Because of that intoxication, they engage in physical misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct. When they frequently contemplate this, that is, when they frequently contemplate that they're subject to decay, that intoxication with youth is either completely abandoned or diminished. Monks, it is for this benefit that I am subject to decay, I am not exempt from decay, should be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic. So this one, this contemplation on decay, recognizing that our body is continually breaking down, continually becoming more and more decrepit, it's gradually losing its strength, progressing towards ever worsening physical conditions, directly counters the intoxication with youth. So the word intoxication here is in fact exactly the same word that one uses when talking about alcohol or other intoxicating substances. It's the same word because it indicates how, especially when we're young and healthy, we tend to become obsessed with that to the point where it weakens our judgment, to the point where it weakens our wisdom. So a good example of this is that young people, teenagers and people in their 20s in particular, tend to have an invincibility complex. So I recall this as well when I was, especially in my teens, when I was a teenager. There was this feeling of invincibility, this feeling that nothing could harm us, nothing could stop us, nothing could break us. That this feeling of youthfulness and energy and vitality was going to last forever and ever. And this works itself very deeply into the mind. It's something which we tend to take as a basic operating premise for what we do. And again, this is quite harmful because it leads to us making very bad choices, like driving 100 miles per hour in a 25 zone, for example. So being really careful to contemplate the fact that we're subject to decay. We're not going to be young and healthy and vivacious forever. Then the second contemplation, the Buddha says, monks, for what benefit should I am subject to sickness? I am not exempt from sickness. Be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic. Monks, there are beings who are intoxicated with health. Because of that intoxication, they engage in physical misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct. When they frequently contemplate this, that intoxication with health is either completely abandoned or diminished. Monks, it is for this benefit that I am subject to sickness, I am not exempt from sickness, should be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic. So this is continuing off of the previous one. So the previous one was intoxication with intoxication with youth. This one is intoxication with health. So similarly, recognizing how when we're healthy, which for most people is actually most of the time we're relatively healthy. And when we're healthy, we tend to fixate on that health. We tend to forget what it's like to be sick. And this can actually lead to some really unpleasant things. So when we're healthy and other people are sick, it's easy to get annoyed or irritated or impatient or frustrated with the people who are sick. It's hard to relate to their experience. So it's quite easy to become very intolerant and unsupportive of others who are sick because we don't really understand what they're going through. But then when we're the ones who are sick, then the tables are turned. We know directly what it is to have a body which is not functioning correctly, a mind which is not functioning correctly. And we also see how the people around us who are healthy, they don't quite seem to understand what we're going through. Unless they themselves are frequently sick, then perhaps they can relate more easily. So it's good to recognize that. It's good to recognize that tendency and to really try to cultivate a genuine sense of empathy and compassion for those who are sick. Again, this is especially relevant these days with this global pandemic going on. There's a lot of people who are terribly ill, a lot of people who are suffering very badly from illness, either directly or indirectly. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are astoundingly insensitive to this. So we really need to be careful to contemplate the fact that we also are subject to exactly the same sickness. And when the sickness touches us, then it becomes personal. It's no longer something that we can avoid or pretend only happens to other people. So I personally know about 15 people. So these are people I actually directly know face to face, not just people I've read about on the internet, who have been diagnosed with COVID-19. So it's not something which is some distant thing happening in some other place. It's something which is tangible. It's real to me. So even though I don't have the illness myself, it's a little bit closer to me than it is to many of the people who are not taking it as seriously. So again, recognizing that, recognizing when we're obsessed with our health, we make bad choices. We're unkind, we're inconsiderate. We don't really consider what it's like for others who are not healthy, for others who are sick. So really making that effort to be as considerate and compassionate and thoughtful as possible towards those who are having health problems. And always to remember that we are in the same condition. We also are subject to sickness. Then the third one. Monks, for what benefit should I am subject to dying, I am not exempt from dying, be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic? Monks, there are beings who are intoxicated with life. Because of that intoxication, they engage in physical misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct. When they frequently contemplate this, that intoxication with life is either completely abandoned or diminished. Monks, it is for this benefit that I am subject to dying, I am not exempt from dying, should be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic. So this one is starting to get very deep into the mind, very deep into the subconscious. So the intoxication with life, the obsession that we have with life, and particularly with the current life that we're living. So one universal trait, which applies to almost everyone, very few exceptions, virtually everyone wants to live. And in particular, they want to continue living with their current body, with their current mind, with their current life. So even someone who says they hate life, when they come face to face with death, usually suddenly discovers that they're actually really, really attached to life. They're really obsessed with life. And similarly, we're so obsessed with life that we often make exceptionally bad choices on that basis. So an example of this is that in Buddhism, we have a precept of not killing. So it's a good precept, don't kill. But when faced with a choice between somebody else's life and our own, how quickly and readily do we throw that precept out the window? How readily would we kill another person in order to save our own life? Most people, very quickly. They wouldn't even hesitate. They might hesitate briefly because it's actually a really creepy thing to kill someone, from what I've heard. Never done this personally, I'm not planning to. But so quickly, when it looks like our life is on the line, our morals go out the window and we start grabbing at anything whatsoever to continue living, even making the most unbelievably despicable choices. So really looking at that. So of course it's not good to want to die, because that's missing the point, and it's going to come anyway. So there's no point in seeking it out early. It's going to happen whenever it's going to happen. But also making sure that we're not so obsessed with avoiding death that we engage in immorality, that we engage in harmful, destructive, unwholesome choices with body, speech, and mind. It's better to live a short, virtuous life than a long, immoral life. Of course, it's better to live a long, moral life, but that's a little bit more challenging to pull off. But do your best. Then the fourth one, monks, for what benefit should everything that is beloved and pleasing will change and be separated from me be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic? Monks, there are beings who have interest and passion for things that are beloved and pleasing. Because of that passion, they engage in physical misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct. This is called congress, by the way, in case you're wondering. When they frequently contemplate this, that interest and passion for things that are beloved and pleasing is either completely abandoned or diminished. Monks, it is for this benefit that everything that is beloved and pleasing will change and be separated from me, should be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic. So as I was speaking about earlier, we tend to get obsessed with things. We get attached to our money, we get attached to our possessions, we get attached to our fame, our respect, we get attached to our cat, we get attached to our relatives, we get attached to our clothes, we get attached to our appearance, we get attached to all kinds of things. And as a result of that, then we make really disgusting, despicable choices. Again, you don't have to look any farther than your politicians these days to see the horrendous choices that people make. Choices which lead to the suffering and death of tens of thousands of people. And they're making these choices just because of greed, just because of wanting to have more money and more stuff, or to hold on to the money and the things that they have. Just looking at that. When we're attached to things, when we have this lust for possessions, we make such horrible decisions, such disgusting and reprehensible choices. And it's all over obsession with things that are changing and becoming separated from us, things that we can't hold on to anyway. And yet we make such horrible decisions trying to hold on to that which we cannot hold on to. So when we contemplate that everything that is beloved and pleasing will change and be separated from us, then we relax our grip. We recognize that there's something much more important than our possessions, and that's our morality. So one thing that I've been emphasizing over and over recently in discussions about the current state of the world, the reason why things are in such bad condition these days is because of rampant immorality. Why do we have government officials making really horrific choices? Because of bad morality. Why is the ocean full of plastic? Bad morality. Why is the air full of pollution? Bad morality. Why are factory farms existing? Really bad morality. Why is the environment filled with poisonous chemicals? Bad morality. Really, really basic. If we had morality, then we wouldn't make all these awful choices. But instead, because we're overwhelmed with greed, obsession, and attachment to getting the stuff we want and keeping the things we like, then we make really awful choices that cause widespread harm and destruction. Such as valuing profits more than valuing medical readiness, valuing money more than valuing helping people. Really terrible. This is why the world is in such bad shape these days. Then the fifth one, the Buddha says, monks, for what benefit should I am the owner of my karma, the recipient of my karma, born from my karma, bound to my karma, inseparable from my karma, any action that I do, whether it is good or evil, I will receive its result. So why should this, for what benefit should this be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, a layperson or a monastic? And the Buddha says, monks, there are beings who have committed physical misconduct, verbal misconduct, or mental misconduct. When they frequently contemplate this, that misconduct is either completely abandoned or diminished. Monks, it is for this benefit that I am the owner of my karma, etc., should be frequently contemplated, whether one is a woman or a man, or a layperson or monastic. So this one, it's actually quite helpful in that if in the past we've done something unwholesome, which realistically we've all done lots and lots of unwholesome things in the past, lots of physical, verbal, and mental misconduct. When we remember that, then we contemplate, I am the owner of my karma, born from my karma, inseparable from my karma. I will experience the consequences of all the choices that I've made. Then we think, well, in that case, I better start making good choices. I better start practicing good conduct of body, speech, and mind. I better give up my misconduct. And so then we give up our misconduct and we commit to good conduct. We commit to wholesome conduct of body, speech, and mind. So that's another reason why the world is in such bad shape these days, is that people aren't paying attention to karma. They're not considering the cause that has led to their present misfortune. They're not considering the fact that every choice that they make is going to have consequences, and harmful choices will have harmful consequences, and beneficial choices will have beneficial consequences. So why do people engage in misconduct? It's because they think they can get away with it. But you never get away with anything. It's impossible to get away from with anything, because every single thing that we do returns to us. So even if nobody sees you doing what you're doing, you still receive its consequences. So when we reflect in this way, then we develop a very strong commitment to morality, a very strong commitment to living a wholesome, upright, moral life, to not only doing physical acts that are good, but also speaking gently and wholesome words, and also keeping a pure mind. So not thinking unwholesome thoughts, not indulging in harmful emotions, purifying our mind as well, which then naturally leads to one committing oneself to studying the Buddha's teachings and practicing meditation, because we recognize that it's only through purifying our mind that we can completely avoid engaging in physical, verbal, and mental misconduct. Then the Buddha goes through these five in another way. He says, monks, a disciple of the noble ones considers this: it is not just me that is subject to decay and not exempt from decay. All beings that come and go, die and reappear, are subject to decay and are not exempt from decay. When one frequently contemplates this, the path is produced. One practices that path, develops it, and commits to it. When one practices that path, develops it, and commits to it, the fetters are completely abandoned and the underlying tendencies are destroyed. So here the Buddha is emphasizing that one should develop the contemplation that this applies to all beings. So we think it's not just me that's subject to decay and not exempt from decay. All beings are in exactly the same state. All beings have exactly the same condition. All beings are subject to decay, not exempt from decay. And it's interesting that he notes that if one contemplates in this way, then the path of spiritual practice becomes clear. One understands the path, and one is able to practice it and develop it in a way that leads to complete enlightenment. So this contemplation, I am subject to decay, not exempt from decay. All beings are also subject to decay and not exempt from decay. It's also breaking down our sense of specialness, our sense of uniqueness. So every now and then I like to quote the movie Fight Club, because the movie Fight Club, despite having many horrific and disturbing qualities to it, it also has a lot of astoundingly wise Buddhist quotes. So I'm not recommending that you watch this movie, but I will still quote it from time to time. One of the greatest quotes, many great quotes from that movie is, "You are not a unique snowflake." Not a unique snowflake. Nope, nope, nope. You're in exactly the same boat as everybody else. You're in exactly the same conditions as everybody else. You are subject to exactly the same things as everybody else. There is nothing special about you. Not at all. So it's not just you that's subject to decay. Everybody is in exactly the same way. So this starts to wear away our sense of self, our sense of self-importance, our sense of self-obsession. Recognizing that we are not special, we are not unique, we are not different from anybody else. So this can develop into the contemplation of not self, which is why it's a path to awakening. Second, monks, a disciple of the noble ones, considers this: it is not just me that is subject to illness and not exempt from sickness. All beings that come and go, die and reappear, are subject to sickness and are not exempt from sickness. When one frequently contemplates this, the path is produced. One practices that path, develops it, and commits to it. When one practices that path, develops it, and commits to it, the fetters are completely abandoned and the underlying tendencies are destroyed. So similarly, applying this to the second contemplation, recognizing that we're not special, we're not unique. That sickness is simply an aspect of human existence. It's an aspect of conscious existence, actually. It's not limited to humans. And once again, using that as a basis for cultivating the contemplation of not self. Third, amongst a disciple of the noble ones considers this: it is not just me that is subject to dying and not exempt from dying. All beings that come and go, die and reappear, are subject to dying and are not exempt from dying. When one frequently contemplates this, the path is produced. One practices that path, develops it, and commits to it. When one practices that path, develops it, and commits to it, the fetters are completely abandoned and the underlying tendencies are destroyed. So again, applying this contemplation of not self to the subject of death as well, and recognizing the universality of it. So there is no being that is immortal. Not even Buddhas are immortal. They live for a period of time and then they pass away like everybody else. So no being is immortal. All beings are subject to dying. And we're all trading places. In this grand infinite stage, this grand infinite play on this grand infinite stage, we're all trading roles. So today I get to play the role of Bhante Sudaso, the Buddhist monk, which is great. A few lifetimes ago, I was playing the role of Jennifer, the devoted layperson at the monastery. A few lifetimes ago, I was playing the role of May, the very friendly and cheerful Burmese laywoman staying at the monastery. So we're all trading roles on this grand stage, which means that fundamentally we're not any one particular role. So again, we can start to approach the realization of not self through these 5 contemplations. Fourth one, monks, a disciple of the noble ones, considers this: it is not just what is beloved and pleasing to me that changes and is separated from me. What is beloved and pleasing to all beings that come and go, die and reappear, changes and is separated from them. When one frequently contemplates this, the path is produced. One practices that path, develops it, and commits to it. When one practices that path, develops it, and commits to it, the fetters are completely abandoned, and the underlying tendencies are destroyed. So this one is, again, quite poignant to me, quite useful. And that often when we lose something that we like, then we go, oh, why is this happening to me? Well, that happens to everyone. It's not like God singled out you for extra torment, but rather you're just undergoing exactly the same thing that everybody else undergoes. Everybody thinks they're special. Everybody's wrong. Okay, and the fifth one, monks, a disciple of the noble ones considers this. It is not just me that is the owner of my karma, recipient of my karma, born from my karma, bound to my karma, inseparable from my karma, and that receives the result of any action I do, whether it is good or evil. All beings that come and go, die and reappear, are the owners of their karma, the recipients of their karma, born from their karma, bound to their karma, inseparable from their karma, and receive the results of any actions that they do, whether those actions are good or evil. When one frequently contemplates this, the path is produced. One practices that path, develops it, and commits to it. When one practices that path, develops it, and commits to it, the fetters are completely abandoned and the underlying tendencies are destroyed. So again, cultivating this contemplation, this recognition that we experience the consequences of all the choices that we make, and so does everybody else. So sometimes, again, we think, oh, why does that person always get away with it? I never get away with it. They never seem to get in trouble. I always get in trouble. Why? But actually, it's just because we're not seeing completely. We don't see the whole picture. They also receive the consequences of their choices. We just don't necessarily see it because our field of view is quite limited. It's quite small. But an awakened being sees the whole picture. They see that nobody escapes the consequences of their choices. Everyone experiences the consequences of their choices, without exception. So once again, this is another way of contemplating the perception of not self, using these 5 contemplations. And then the Buddha completes with a little verse, a little bit of poetry, which, again, as I've mentioned in the past, Pali poetry is nearly impossible to translate, as with any poetry. So poetry in general doesn't function very well outside of its original language. So the translation here captures the meaning, but doesn't really capture the poetry. So you'll just have to learn Pali and read it in Pali, and then you'll appreciate it a lot more. So the Buddha says, subject to sickness, subject to decay, and subject to dying. This is the nature of beings, which ordinary people despise. If I despise that and the beings who have that nature, it would not be appropriate, as I am just the same. Considering this, I knew the state free of acquisition. I knew intoxication with health, youth, and life. I overcame all intoxication and saw the safety of renunciation. I made an effort and saw nibbana. Now it is not possible for me to indulge in sensuality. I will not return. I have completed the spiritual life. So this really, really beautiful summation of this practice and how this practice leads to awakening. So one thing I find interesting here is that he points out that ordinary people despise these characteristics, that everyone is subject to sickness, decay, and dying. And you can see this, again, you can see how people get impatient with other people being sick. You just look at it these days. How many people are getting impatient with this whole pandemic thing? Note that it's the people who aren't sick that are getting impatient with it. Oh, why do all these people have to be getting sick and dying? It's so inconvenient. I'm not making as much money as I used to. This is terrible. So, oh, come on, please. There's no sense in being upset about other people getting sick and dying, because that's the way of things. We always knew it was the way of things. We just liked to pretend it wasn't the way of things until it affected us. Then we get upset, or we get irritated, or we get sad. But none of that is the proper response. The proper response is just to see, this is the way of things. There is sickness, there is decay, there is dying. That's how it is. There's no sense in getting upset about this, getting upset about the situation, getting upset about the people experiencing it. But rather to recognize this is samsara. And the only freedom from the dukkha of samsara is to cultivating renunciation, non-attachment, letting go. So here he speaks about the safety of renunciation, which I find a really beautiful phrase, the safety of renunciation. So it's through renunciation that one is able to experience true safety, true peace of mind. And also he emphasizes here that an awakened being is incapable of indulging in sensuality. Their mind just does not incline at all towards indulgence in sensuality. It doesn't go there at all. It's completely unthinkable. So that's the end of this sutta. So commonly, people who are familiar with the 5 contemplations, they're only familiar with the first section of this sutta. But you'll notice the Buddha actually gives 4 distinct sections. The first one is just the bare contemplations as they are. The second one is contemplating the benefit of doing these 5 contemplations. The third one is using the 5 contemplations as a way of developing the recognition of not self. And then the fourth section is the poetic summation of the experience of using these 5 contemplations as a path to awakening. So at this time, if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and write them in the live chat, and I'll answer them as best I can.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So there are a few amusing quotes on Fight Club, like sticking feathers up your butt does not make you a chicken. Apparently people are familiar with Fight Club. And also you weren't supposed to talk about Fight Club.
Oops. Have you seen Fight Club?
And Sally is Fight Club?
No.
So Sally, Fight Club apparently is a movie that a lot of people in this country are fans of and have watched. But it's not essential to the Buddhist path to watch it. You can just take the quotes that Bhante has shared that are pertinent to the path. And that's sufficient. And Boon is asking, Bhante, sometimes when we attach to pets, sometimes we need to do bad choices, like killing other sentient beings like fleas or worms to take care of the cat. What do you think?
Well, as far as fleas, as far as I know, there are non-lethal ways of removing fleas from your pets. I don't know because I've never been in the condition of needing to remove fleas from pets, but I was under the impression that there's non-lethal ways of doing it. As for parasitic infections inside the pet's body, such as worms inside the pet's body, that's a more complicated issue. So my training when we were going through Vinaya classes, so classes on monastic precepts, so my training in that was that, and this was for monks in particular, it didn't cover the issue of pets. But for monks, if we have a parasitic infection, then getting treatment for that was not considered to be a violation of monastic precepts. So that is a bit of a gray area, I can't deny, but it's one where it's a bit easier for me to see the rationale. It's a bit easier for me to see. So when you really don't have any choice, then sometimes we have to make uncomfortable choices. But most of life is not moral gray zones. Most of life is actually pretty black and white. Most of the time, we really know what we're doing and why we're doing it. But also in that case, it's reflecting, like, what am I doing? I'm trying to help my pet be healthy. I'm trying to do what's necessary for my pet to be healthy and to live. Because also parasitic infections can cause death, which also kills the parasite. So it's kind of counterproductive for the parasite as well. Yeah, so it's a difficult case, and I can't tell you for sure exactly what the right choice is. So if you're faced with that choice, then do the best you can, and don't dwell in it. But also just recognize that sometimes we have to make awkward choices. Okay.
Thank you. And James is asking, once I read that awakening to path of stream entry cannot occur in a being who lacks merit from past lives. Do the suttas say anything about this, since we have little time to practice in this life?
Well, first off, just recognize that you already have a gigantic stockpile of merit from past lives. Otherwise, you wouldn't have access to the Buddhist teachings in the first place. So you don't need to worry about that. Okay?
Also, you have plenty of opportunities to make merit in this life.
Yeah.
And Jens says, Bhante, I reflect on these as part of my practice. I recite these 5 subjects before each meditation session. It's had a powerful, subtle, and sometimes unexpected impact on me. But speaking of guilt, last night, I feel guilty I have not learned these reflections in Pali and do incorporate them in chanting. Should I memorize how to chant these in Pali?
If you like. So chanting things in Pali does have a couple of benefits. One is that it gives you a visceral feeling of connection to ancient Buddhist tradition. So whether or not the Buddha spoke in exactly the same language as Pali is questionable, but he probably spoke something extremely similar. So it does give you the sense of connection, reaching back to the Buddha. And also words which have been repeated for a very, very long time, at least 2,000 years. And the other benefit of chanting something in Pali is if you know the meaning of the Pali words, then as you're chanting, then you know what you're saying, which to me, since I know Pali, I would much rather chant in Pali than in any translation, because translations are always inaccurate. Even the best translation is always a little bit wrong. So it's always best to chant in the original language or as close as you can get. But if you don't know Pali, then it's not such a big deal. It becomes more a matter of building faith, building up the faculty of faith, which is a good thing. It's actually a really useful thing. But it's less critical if you don't know Pali. So it's definitely also not something to feel guilty about. There's lots of things that I haven't memorized, and I don't feel the slightest bit guilty about that. So there's no moral injunction that you have to memorize things in Pali and chant things in Pali. But if it's something that you find helpful and supportive and nourishing to your practice, then definitely do it. Otherwise, it's fine to recite them in English. Yeah, no problem. It's up to you. Learn Pali, by the way. It makes life a lot better. And it's not a terribly difficult language.
And Ethan says, regards to the merit, talking to Buddhist monks and nuns on YouTube equals mucho merit.
Yeah.
And Mark is asking what translation of this sutta is Bhante using. He's using his own translation. Bhante Sudaso likes to translate suttas, so you can find them on his website, bhantesudaso.com. And Marielle said, actually, Sally's asking about Rupa's quote earlier that says the cup is already broken by Ajahn Brahm. It's actually a quote from Ajahn Chah, who Ajahn Brahm probably quoted in a talk. So if you put the cup is already broken on Google, you'll find the talks of Ajahn Chah. Easy, very easy. Marielle, whoops, I lost it. said, you said there's a lay Burmese person at the monastery. Tell them Minga Bar. I don't know what that means.
Like good morning. Or
Like what?
Good morning.
Oh, good morning.
Oh, so
everything you can use.
Okay. We learned a new word. Tado. And Carol asks, to add on to the pet question, this is different, but for the feral cat colonies, some animal rescue groups practice TNR, trap, neuter, release. But if the vets encounter a pregnant cat during the neutering procedure, they terminate the pregnancies. So it feels like kind of a lose-lose situation. If you don't help and reduce cat colonies from multiplying, more cats will die, but removing kittens in the womb is disturbing.
Yeah, I agree. That's a bit disturbing. TNR, I don't have a problem with. So that's trap, neuter, release. For those who don't know, it's the practice of neutering feral cats rather than killing them. So I think that's much more humane than killing them. But actually, realistically, I'm a fan of just not interfering with nature. Like, who cares that there's feral cats? I'm actually quite fond of feral cats. I find them cute. So the previous neighborhood where we had our previous temple, full of feral cats, and it was so adorable. They would just like hang out on the sidewalk and by the subway station and on the streets, and it was great. Like, you'd be walking around and you'd always see half a dozen cats. I didn't mind at all. So, of course, some cats die from overpopulation, but what are you going to do? I'm not entirely sure that neutering all the cats is really the proper solution.
It's a more complex situation, actually, because they take animals and they kill them at the shelter. So TNR is to reduce the population so that then...
Well, the problem there is the people taking cats and killing them at the shelter then. So that actually, to me, is far more disturbing, is humans actively killing animals and then at the same time actively breeding more cats. So we have the people actively producing an overpopulation of cats, and then we have the people actively killing the overpopulation of cats. That's what disturbs me. Maybe if both sides just stop, then there'll be no problem. We'll have the right amount of cats. But again, I'm not an expert on cat politics or cat population control, so I'm really not the best person to talk about those things. But yeah, I would say that killing cats is bad. Let's try not to do that. Trap, neuter, release, depending on your intentions, may or may not be a wholesome activity. Delivering unrequested abortions to pregnant cats, yeah, again, that feels a little bit wrong to me. Something seems off there. Not such a big fan of that either. But once again, I'm not an expert on cat politics. I'm not the one to ask.
And Boone says, Bante, events that happen to us in our karma, is it the same or sometimes different?
So in the suttas, the Buddha describes the functioning of karma in very little detail, but he does give some general outlines of how it works. And he does seem to describe that the consequences we receive are similar to the actions that we made. So an example he gives is that if you hurt other people, then in the future you will have a lot of afflictions. If you are stingy and greedy, then in the future you'll be poor. But on the flip side, if you're generous, then in the future you'll be wealthy. If you nurse other people back to health, then in the future you'll be healthy. So he gives these general outlines, which give you some sense as to how karma and its consequences are related to each other. But the Buddha also warns that The workings of karma are an incredibly complex interweaving web of many different interacting causes and conditions, which makes it very difficult to predict the exact effects of any particular choice because it's influenced and modified by so many other factors. Okay?
And Sally says, the example Bhante gave about attached to life really astonished me. When I examine myself, I'm attached to this life because I don't know next life. I can encounter Buddhism, like BI teaching or not. Due to anicca, seems like I consider this very important when facing deep morality choice. How to overcome and correct this?
Well, first off, make the resolution to always be born close to the Dharma. Make the resolution no matter where you're born, no matter what condition it is. May you always have access to the Dharma, always have access to opportunities to practice the Dharma, the ability to understand and live the Dharma. That's really important. Second, make a commitment to Sila, Samadhi, and Panya and keep developing that commitment. So in the Jataka tales, many of the Jataka tales are stories where the Bodhisattva, before he became the Buddha, where the Bodhisattva was upholding some aspect of morality, even when it meant losing his possessions, even his life in some cases. So it indicated that the path to awakening does mean having this very intense commitment to morality. So not discarding our morality lightly. Okay? So yeah, I mean, what you're saying, that we have this life with access to the Dhamma, and we don't know if the next one will or not, or when we might encounter it again, that's true. So yes, we should develop as strong an affinity with the Dhamma in this life as we can, which means also upholding perfect morality in this life, because perfect morality is building our affinity with the Dhamma. Discarding our morality for any justification is weakening our affinity with the Dhamma. Okay?
And Ron is saying two curiosities. One, renunciation at what cost of suffering inflicted? Buddha did renounce his family, thereby creating suffering to them. Was there a middle ground for him to achieve this being with family? Is there any sutta that talks about it? Maybe we'll do the first point and then I'll pass on the second
What
one.
was the first point again?
The Buddha being a deadbeat father, I think.
Oh, right. Okay, so
So renunciation at what cost of suffering inflicted? Buddha renounced his family, creating suffering to them. Was there a middle ground for him to achieve this being with family?
this is something I find interesting, which is that Asian Buddhists never seem to have any problem whatsoever with the story of the Buddha leaving behind his family to go off and become the Buddha. And yet, about 90% of Western Buddhists seem to think that this is morally reprehensible behavior which caused terrible suffering. So I just want to point that out briefly, that people who actually come from Buddhist cultures recognize that there was absolutely nothing wrong with what the Buddha did. So just starting with that, just throwing that out there, food for thought. So one of the metaphors that people sometimes find helpful is the metaphor of the hero's journey. So let's imagine that you are a person with a spouse and a young child, and all three of you are afflicted with a terrible, deadly illness. And the only way that you can get medicine for this illness is to temporarily leave behind your spouse and child and go off to a distant land and get the medicine, which will cure not just you and your spouse and your child, but will also cure countless millions of other people. What would you do? Naturally, you would go off in search of that medicine, which would not only save your own life and the life of your spouse and the life of your child, but also would bring benefit to countless millions of people. Naturally, that's what you would do. You're not inflicting suffering on your family. You're bringing them happiness and health and safety and security. And not just them, but also countless living beings. So that's what the Buddha was doing. He wasn't like, oh, I'm sick of this daddy business. I don't want to take care of this child. You can take care of him yourself. No, the Buddha was thinking, how can I bring benefit, not just to myself, but also to my wife, also to my son, and also to all sentient beings? So he went off and he became enlightened, and he went back and he taught his wife and child, and they both became fully enlightened. He also taught countless other people, many of whom became fully enlightened. And his teachings have passed down over the millennia, touching the lives of literally billions of people. That is the story of the hero's journey. It's not the story of the deadbeat dad who hates his wife and son. Okay? All right, what was the other part of the question?
And thank you, Bhante. And number 2 is, if one assumes current suffering is a cause of past karma, then where and how lies the options for new karma for future proofing from suffering?
Right in this moment. Right in this moment, you're making karma. So make it good karma. There's your answer.
And Kevin is saying, I agree, Bhante, in my country. Kam is from Laos. This is my editorial note. I agree, Bhante, in my country, we never talk about him leaving his family. And we have married men like my uncle who left their families to become monks. Most of their families rejoin, and families continue to support these monks, former husbands/fathers. Thank you so much for sharing that, Cam.
Yeah.
And I'll scroll up to Sally, who says, I think I have faith in the triple gem. Not sure the reason. The faith I'm building now, I don't have confidence because these causes will continue in future lives to have encounter triple gems. How to correct these thoughts? I felt shame and will work on the Dhamma.
Well, also recognize that the shame is not helpful. Instead, focus on your commitment to being close to the Dhamma. Focus on the joy that you find in the Dhamma. Focus on your deep appreciation for the Dhamma. So focus on those qualities. If you focus on your shortcomings, then you'll always be disappointed because you're going to have shortcomings until you attain full enlightenment. Focusing on our shortcomings doesn't do us much good. Focusing on our positive qualities helps to nurture and develop those positive qualities. So it's great that you really love the Dhamma and that you don't want to risk losing access to the Dhamma. That's wonderful. Focus on that wonderfulness and do your best in this life to live in accordance with Dhamma, to study the Dhamma, to practice the Dhamma, to cultivate faith in the Buddha. Do the best you can and have that aspiration. May I always be reborn close to the Dhamma. May I always have access to the teachings of the Buddha. Then you don't have anything to worry about. And you have nothing to be ashamed of because you're developing the path. It's really helpful to recollect. I am on the path of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. I am on the path that leads to full enlightenment, to full awakening. I'm not there yet, but I'm going in the right direction. And I'm going to keep going until I get there. Isn't that a wonderful, joyful thought? Okay.
And Marielle says, I read that the Buddha met afterwards with Yasodhara and let her give vent to her pent-up feeling freely. I mean, yeah, he left them, but he was also humane and came back and reached out, no? Like, hey, so we're all sick, so I left to find out more about it. But nonetheless, I didn't mean for you to feel bad, no?
Okay, so I want to hear like the suttas according to Marielle. That would be so much fun.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's the best.
Yeah, so Marielle, if you ever get inspired, I'd like you to like go and rewrite the suttas in your own voice. I think that would be deliciously fun.
All right, that was the last comment for this morning.
Okay.
So I think that's all. Thank you, Bhante, for sharing the teachings as usual. Sadhu. Sadhu, sadhu. And we'll meet again this evening at 7:30 p.m. where Bhante will be sharing the Dharma. I don't remember the topic, but it will be good. Oh, I think it's faith. I think it's faith, if I remember correctly.
Good.
Very good topic. All right, so see you this evening. Yes, Sally is confirming it's faith. So that's what we'll be discussing this evening. And then tomorrow morning, we'll be doing meditation and chanting. And then in the evening, we'll have monk chat.
Great.
So bring all your questions and we'll be answering all the questions. And Sunny says, I am the fan
Great.
of faith. Great. All right. Well, have a great and see you soon.